Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Lin. I'm a clinical professor, chief of general primary care, and the director for the Stanford Healthcare AI Applied Research Team, or HEA₃RT. It's my pleasure here today to be sitting with this incredible group of individuals, all thought leaders in the area of putting patients at the center of AI design. And before we get started, we'll just do some brief introductions, starting right over here.
Great. Hi. Your microphone's on? Okay. First of all, I'm just so happy to be here and happy to hear all of the amazing work that you all are doing. This is really important. My name's Libby Hoy. I'm the founder and CEO of PFCCpartners. We're a patient and family-driven organization that I started in 2010 as a result of my family's journey, first as my mom's primary caregiver while she battled breast cancer. And then shortly after she passed, I had 3 sons living with mitochondrial disease. And finally, my own journey with stage 4 salivary gland cancer in 2016. So I'm really here to represent our community of the PFA network, over 1,100 folks like myself, just trying to use our experience to help you, all of you, to create the vision for a person-centered health system we want to see.
Good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Jen King. I am the Privacy and Data Policy Fellow at Stanford HEA. My background is in information science, and so my primary area of research is consumer privacy, and as I'll talk about a little bit as we get going, I did a research study on 23andMe adopters, which has been a very interesting case to follow given the current events.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Downing. I am co-founder and board president of a patient-led organization called the Light Collective. We are on a mission to advance the rights, interests, and voices of patient communities in health technology. One of our guiding principles is no aggregation without representation. My background is as a security researcher, but I actually started as a BRCA1 advocate who organized my community around a case on whether human genes could be patented.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Doerr. I'm the Director of Applied Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications Research at Sage Bionetworks. Sage Bionetworks is a nonprofit open science organization based in Seattle, Washington. We warehouse north of 3.5 petabytes of NIH data, and we convene large groups of solvers around those data in challenges and other activities.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. Looking forward to the conversation. Well, let's just jump right into it, starting with a state of affairs. And this question will go to Meg first. So AI promises to make healthcare smarter, faster, and more precise. But too often, the people these technologies are meant to help, patients, are left out of the conversation. So how do you think we're doing when it comes to keeping patients at the center of AI in healthcare? What's going well, and where do you think we still have work to do?
Thanks so much for this sort of level-setting question. I really appreciate starting here. So we know that patient involvement in care is both a moral and empirical good. We have oodles of empirical data that suggests that involving patients in their care leads to better outcomes. Involving patients in research leads to better research, empirically better research, tailored treatments, more uptake of those treatments. So there's no doubt that patient involvement is important. Where we're struggling, though, is how do we scale patient involvement for an entirely digital ecosystem, right? So we have all of these beautiful methods of patient-engaged research, right? The Corey network has done incredible work there. But how do we scale those for computational spaces? And I feel like it's really important that we think about how we scale them for computational spaces because when we don't involve patients, they rise up against us. and from early, many of you may remember the ACT UP protests, right? The disability rights protests, nothing about us without us. We come all the way forward to our ability as clinicians to instantiate communities out of data, to create, for example, the Previver community, which didn't even exist before we identified the BRCA genes, right? And so if we don't listen, they're going to come for us. And I think we're already seeing that. We're seeing some disconnect between the advances that we're making in medicine and the public's willingness to believe us, right? So it's really critical that we involve patients. How do we do it for a digital environment? And especially, these data are already warehoused. I mean, Sage's 3.5 petabytes of data, like they're there. They're waiting for computational geneticists, statistical experts to be working with them. And certainly, people don't necessarily go into math because they want to talk to people, right? I mean, like, no offense, but I work with a lot of those people, right? And so I feel like there's a gaping hole in the infrastructure that would enable meaningful engagement of patients in the praxis of big health data research. But it's a need. We've got to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Meg. Andrea?
So I will start with the story of Rising Up back in 2013. I was part of, as I mentioned, the BRCA community, and we didn't exist before genetic testing, and we had to organize together in a place online. If you heard of social media, that was a place that early on was really magical in being able to organize communities, being able to learn from each other, but also being able to advance our interests. And what we ended up doing was learning about this case on whether BRCA1 and 2 could be patented. The case or the genes in question were my genes, BRCA1. I have a bug in my code, I like to say, and have now turned into a mutant hacker. And so back then, the patent on the genes was being used to make the test really inaccessible and expensive. And when it went all the way to the Supreme Court, we found ourselves organizing with different stakeholders to overturn the patents. So how does that history apply now? Well, the first thing is I want to start not from a place of fear or adversarial ways of engaging, but from a place of partnership and from a place of abundance. Because I truly believe in the transformative power of AI to help us if patients are part of the design from the very beginning. And we're just at this stage where we're only beginning to learn how AI is going to impact our care. So what am I doing right now and what am I focused on? Last year, we created the Patient AI Rights Initiative, the first and only initiative of its kind to bring together advocacy organizations when not all of us understand or agree the ways forward in terms of governance, policy, or the ways we might establish ourselves in partnership with research institutions or companies developing these solutions. But we do know that if we are not at the table, or if we do not have real rights, we may end up getting harmed, just like we did with the BRCA1 and 2 patents back in the day. And so the question is how. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I just see this as such an important moment in time and a call to action for people who are willing to support and establish the roles of patient communities in advocacy anew. And the last thing I'll say is I often hear this, term in these conferences. I've been to them so many times over the last 15 years that we're all patients. And I'm going to say something a bit controversial. No, we're not. Unless you have lived through a cancer diagnosis, you are not a cancer patient. Unless you have gone through a widowmaker heart attack and survived and had a pacemaker implanted in your heart, you do not actually represent that perspective in the way that a patient with lived experience can. So I really hope that when we look at AI and the one common denominator that is not going to change as healthcare rapidly evolves because of this new technology, it's the patient. We are still going to be here living our experiences and thinking through how we solve our problems and our priorities, and we're hoping that healthcare will engage with us instead of us just engaging with healthcare and technology.
Thank you for those remarks. They're wonderful. I heard it's not just the right thing to do to put patients in the center, but it's going to be what we need to do to bring AI to the next level of sophistication. And that will require a lot of data sharing, and that leads to our next question around privacy. And this will go to you, Jen, and then Libby next. There's often an assumption that patients are afraid of sharing their data, but is that really true? Should we be designing systems to lock everything down, or are we missing the real issue, which might be about control, not just about privacy?
Sure. So I would expand that to say it's often about trust and less about control. How many of you feel like you actually have control over all the data that's collected about you on a daily basis right now? Probably not. And I see, people on smartphones. Your data has been tracked already this morning, probably all morning, and sold on resale markets. I mean, it is ubiquitous and happening at every moment. Sorry. So I think some of the concerns are really around who can I trust? And we've certainly seen the tech industry really destroy user trust on a grand scale over the last 15 years. And so my biggest advice is don't do what big tech has done in the medical space. But I don't think it's inherently about being afraid to share your data. So I mentioned I did some of my dissertation research on early adopters of 23andMe. And I do think their business model was amazing in the sense that they were able to capture two things. One I call the narcissistic piece. You got to find out all of this data about you, some of which I think was a little specious, but if you needed to know that you had the gene that allowed you to look at lights and sneeze, great, you found that data out, right? But I would also call that the value proposition. Like people saw something really valuable in that. And so that was the narcissistic piece. The other piece is the public outreach piece. And so what I found when I talked to some of these folks was that they were extremely motivated by the idea that they were helping science, that their data was being used for a greater good. And so this was the research portion of 23andMe, which again, they absolutely engaged, and I would argue a lot of legitimate academic, nonprofit-focused research. The people I talked to were much less knowledgeable about the corporate research that was being done with their data, because that's not what was led with. That's not what they were really informed about. But I think from that experience, what I would say is that it's not necessarily about locking everything down, but I do think it's about being honest and establishing a level of trust about what your data will actually be used for. And as we all know right now in our consumer lives, we really do have no control. That data is being bought and sold. Most of us are completely oblivious to what's happening. And it's extremely hard, if not impossible, to opt out or even consent. There is no, I would argue, notion of consent like there is in the medical space. None of you have probably read any of the consent dialogues or checkboxes or anything you've been presented with, right, as consumers. So I think keeping in mind that if you can think about data collecting and using data in a way that really speaks to the public mission or a broader public interest, then people are actually quite willing to participate. But it's when they really don't know what's going to happen, who's going to profit, and they don't see that they're actually going to have any real value proposition. That's where I think you start to lose people.
Thank you, Jen. Libby, what do you think?
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I'm not going to be ashamed to admit I went to ChatGPT to prepare for this morning. I did, because I wanted to see what was out there. And I think to your point, some of the things I asked ChatGPT about, are there any programs right now that will help maintain my own records, right, or my own health records? Because I'm sitting next to a box of records like this, huge. And they said, yes, here's this thing, and it's great, and you can upload all of your data. And I'm like, all right. And so I went to that site, and I checked it out. And for the free version, you just have to sign away all your data, and then they can sell it to researchers, and they can sell it to pharmaceuticals, and on, and so on, and so on. So I asked ChatGPT, so what's my cut of that? What financial impact do I have back? well, there isn't one. Well, you didn't mention that up front, right? So I think the point of sharing that is it's the transparency that relates to trust. And how do we get that transparency? We go back to co-design. We bring in the patient-family perspective very early on. And I have goosebumps about thinking about where we are in this moment of time. And all of you brilliant people that are moving forward AI in a human-centered way. I mean, that's unheard of, you know, and so I want to implore you, we can find ways. We're all in this together. I really, you know, want to break down or challenge you to think of your patients and you, or research teams and clinicians. We're all in this together, and we're all have a common goal of wanting to improve outcomes for our patients, for ourselves, for our institutions. And AI can have so much potential to do that. So I think that co-design is really important. I also want to connect the fact that, yes, if I have all of my information, right now I have access to information. What I'd really like to have is control of my information. And I'd really like to plant the seed that maybe if we flipped and had people control all of their healthcare information, that could be a really efficient way to go, right? Because my sons had 6 different specialists following them across a variety of different health systems, right? So who was the ultimate case manager? I was. Who was the holder of information that moved information between providers? I am. So what if I had all of that information? Isn't that a more efficient model? The patient is the one continuity in the health system. We go to community-based health systems, we go to university-based health systems, we go to chiropractors, we go to anybody who can help us, right? What if we leveraged that and allowed patients and families not just to help you design these AI systems and implementation, but also to carry that information for themselves?
Wonderful. Jen, you mentioned how the importance of trust, and Libby, you built on that by saying that co-design is really important to achieve that trust, which leads us greatly into the next question, which is models of engagement. So this will go to you first, Andrea. There's growing recognition that engaging patients is really, really important, but how do we move from good intentions to actually doing it? So what models or approaches have you seen that truly elevate the patient voice?
So at the Light Collective, we have 36 patient-led organizations within our coalition. And the goal with these organizations is, first of all, let's understand that when you're trying to recruit patients, often we're not as interested in focus groups for a gift card. We're interested in partnership. And when we say partnership, that means a different thing to our communities, I think, than it does to a lot of the folks that are seeking to partner with us. And we have to relearn how to partner, where you can think of us as colleagues, co-PIs. You can think of us as co-founders or people that you place on your boards for governance. And, you know, I just recently had a conversation with a UC system group that gave this almost like heartbreaking answer to thinking about how we partner. And the perception was that we might slow research down. We really have to counter that. And I kind of think of what is the one citation or the example that we have that actually patients slow research down. We don't actually have that. We have a lot of data and research that, you know, May can point to on how it improves the design and ability for us to get things done faster, better, and counter this idea that, like, right now, 80% of clinical trials fail. So, you know, we can work with these networks, these grassroots networks and patient communities, and support them anew. The way that we do that in the Light Collective is a cohort-based approach. So with funding last year from Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and previously with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, what we did was we built cohorts where we paired up groups of people who are leaders within patient communities concerned about these emerging issues in AI, but recognizing that they need to be a part of the learning process. So we created these 6-month projects where we all got together, we debated, and at the end of the project, we had a work product. So with the Patient AI Rights Initiative, we put our 7 principles for collective rights up on GitHub, and we started, sharing this out at all the conferences that we went to, or with the co-authors and publications that we're working on to try to establish what our different role in this is. So I would say that, and the last thing here is, when it comes to trust and when it comes to control, I think in the past, we've created this illusion of control, and we've created this illusion of trust that is often very performative. And what that looks like is kind of putting patients on like a side working committee or something that is not actually tied to the needs, priorities, or interests of that specific community. So depending on what community you're working with, for me, it's BRCA. We want to see, and we would passionately love to work on data sharing for BRCA so we have more variants of uncertain significance that are classified, so that we have more targeted therapies. If somebody is diagnosed with stage 4 triple-negative breast cancer, we are improving the outcome for that person. So we see where the problems are in the places where we want to fill the gaps and the unmet needs.
Meg, any thoughts?
Yeah, so this is really the focus of my lab's work, is figuring out how we integrate communities into the actual praxis of big health data research, into the AI itself. I think one of the fundamental challenges is that, there's 2 aspects to it, is that when we think about big health data, harkening back to my earlier comments, one of the things that we often do in doing this research is instantiate new communities. So we're not just thinking about like the usual suspects here. We're identifying sub-communities or subgroups that may not ever know of themselves as communities. There's a great article in Wired a couple of years ago about this woman who had chronic endometriosis, and she went into pain crisis pretty regularly. She was trying to preserve her fertility, so she was not having surgery yet. She'd be hospitalized for pain crisis. She'd receive opioid medication. She'd be, get back on her feet. She'd be released again. She goes through this rhythm regularly. One time she's in the hospital, she's getting discharged, and they're like, yeah, no, you don't get any more pain medication. And she was like, excuse me, like, same uterus, like, what's going on here, people? It turned out that she had adopted an elderly cat. The elderly cat needed pain medication. Pain medication for animals is prescribed in the owner's name. She had been flagged as being as drug-seeking behavior, right? So she suddenly found herself in the community of people with chronic pain who own elderly pets who need pain medication themselves, right? Not a community per se, right? Like, not only because she belonged to like a Reddit subthread did she even figure this out. And so this is one of the real challenges when we try to really think about what would it look like to integrate communities into AI research. Who are those people? How do we establish representativeness? And so I think that one of the things that I'm trying to impart is not that this is impossible, but that this is exciting. That this is something that we can take on as a challenge. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, with genomic research, we instantiated communities. Andrea's community didn't exist before the BRCA mutations were identified. So I think really examining the nature of community and then figuring out ways to bring communities into the places where research is actually done, where big data research is actually done. So onto the platform, so that we're not just limiting communities to oversight, boards, which is not actually involving them in finding solutions. So.
Right. So moving from good intentions to meaningful influence and not just performative. That's wonderful. Next question, we'll have Libby start first. So for years, patients have turned to Dr. Google, and it's now Dr. ChatGPT to make sense of their health outside the clinic. Now that it's becoming a lot more accessible, how are we seeing AI empower patients and caregivers in new ways? What are the risks and the responsibilities that come with giving people smarter tools to guide their own care?
Thank you. So in our community, we've been having conversations about AI and where it's showing up for us and where it's showing up in surprise to us. So we hear stories like a wonderful community member who has a cardiac issue among many other issues. And as she sought out some consultation on a medication, she had multiple calls to the office and talked to Melinda. And Melinda was wonderful and was very helpful. And so when Rosie went into her next appointment, she said, "Oh, can I meet Melinda? She was so great with me." And the front office staff laughed and said, "Melinda isn't a person, it's AI." That's not funny to someone who's on the other end who feels like they're establishing a relationship. And that's the kind of transparency. There was also a lot of fear 6 months ago. And even over the course of the last 6 months, so much has happened to where people are using these tools to be able to get more details about their condition, to try to figure out a diagnostic train. And I think that's, we're going to just see more and more of that. So again, I want to create a team approach. We're all in this together. We want to get to the same place. We want information. And if you think about Bev Johnson and the foundational work she's done with patient and family-centered care, what's one of the core concepts? Information sharing. Our systems are not set up for information sharing. So is this an opportunity moment to create that infrastructure for reciprocal sharing, right? Knowledge is power. If we want to empower patients to be part of their care, even the most underrepresented of our communities can do that if they have information, right? So I think back to the mid-90s when we started with, it took us 7 years in a nationwide search to get the boys properly diagnosed with mitochondrial disorder. I think about that search all the time, right? We had a fantastic team of doctors, but who was more invested in figuring out the answer than we were, right? But I couldn't get in, well, I snuck in, to the medical libraries. People didn't have access to medical libraries, so I went to our local medical school and I snuck in. And why are we doing that? This is an opportunity to share information, and not only share information to educate, but also build systems where patients can educate you, where we can share how we're experiencing this particular disease. I have 3 sons with mitochondrial dysfunction. They each experience it very differently, even though a lot of the symptoms are the same. So building the infrastructure for true information sharing built on the principle of reciprocity, I think is just a huge opportunity for us. And so how do we do that? I'm really concerned about our vulnerable communities, our communities with low education, low SES. I'm really concerned about them when they're part of our organization, so we get to hear the particular unique challenges of that community. I want to bring those voices into what we're doing and the systems we're designing so that we can ensure, and I feel like, our organization's goofing around with AI interpretation. Is it perfect? No way. But is it building trust with our communities in Los Angeles County to say, we're trying, let's figure this out. Does this work for you? And they're like, oh God, no, that was awful. Okay, let's try that one. Okay, so it's just being committed, I think, to reciprocal information sharing is a way to build trust. In California, we're so lucky with the work going on in CalAIM. They've created a whole infrastructure around community health workers and Pomodoros programs. Why can't we tap into those groups as trust brokers and bring real peer-to-peer learning so that our underrepresented communities can access AI tools and can use them effectively in ways that are meaningful to them?
Thanks, Libby. Jen?
Sure, I'll say very briefly because I think we're almost at time. As an information scientist, I think about information quality, and I have deep concerns about these general purpose tools being used to provide advice and information at this stage. You've probably all heard of the many missteps with generative AI and being suggested you should put rocks on pizza and eat glue and all those fun things. They are statistical prediction machines. They are not information quality machines. So that doesn't mean that you can't create I would say, more narrow purpose AI tool that is trained on quality data that could potentially help both the medical profession and patients, although obviously translating the work that you all do into understandable patient language is maybe a big bridge, and maybe that is where these tools could be helpful. But there are definitely, I would think, not only information quality risks, but there are also deep privacy risks with some of these tools. And I was just at a conference last week reviewing a paper where a group did an audit of one of these open data databases that people use for training data. And one of the things that struck me that they mentioned was how academic medical research literature is being included in many of these open training sets. But what you're seeing is that individuals with rare conditions or papers with images of patients, even if they've been anonymized, but that represent some unusual condition, are showing up in these training sets, and then multiple AI systems are retraining on this data. And one thing we do know, there are kind of two impacts on training that are concerning. One is recency effects, meaning that if you train a system, it will more often memorize or repeat back information that it saw later in the training process. But the other is what I think of as kind of the Beyonce effect, which is that when it's Beyonce, there's so much data about Beyonce, so many images, it just kind of blurs. But if you only have a single image of a rare disease, and then you ask one of these machines, to give you information about it, chances are it will access that data and bring it up in a way that potentially just perpetuates the repetition of it. Maybe it's a privacy violation, maybe it's not, it may depend on how it was originally captured. But just to say, we don't know right now how these giant general purpose models truly work when it comes to the influence of any single data point that's been used in those training sets. So go with caution. But I would definitely say there's opportunity for very high quality tools, but I would be much more concerned if I were a physician about my patients getting advice from ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these tools right now.
Well, I feel like we can go on for a lot longer, but unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for today. Well, first of all, allow me to thank you all for the work that you do and for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you so much.